Boy gets bullied, but his pitbull shows up. This is a story that will leave you speechless. What happens midway through completely changes the ending. We'd love to know which city you're watching this video from. Drop it in the comments. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with all our content. Lucas Santos was 12 years old, but his world felt as though it was locked in the shadows of his school. He was the kind of kid who would always sit at the back of the class, his head down, avoiding any attention. His classmates barely noticed him unless it was to make him the butt of their jokes. For Lucas, school was a daily battle, one where the odds were stacked against him from the very start. Vitor Oliveira was the leader of a small group of popular kids, and Lucas's greatest tormentor. He and his friends made it their mission to make Lucas's life miserable. It didn't take much for them to mock him, his quiet nature, his awkwardness, and, most of all, his inability to excel in sports. The other boys would laugh as Lucas fumbled through gym class, unable to catch a ball or run as fast as the others. Vitor would call him weak, too frail to be a real man. "Come on, Lucas," Vitor would say, his voice dripping with mockery. "Don't you want to be a real guy? Or are you too much of a wimp?" Each word was a blow, but Lucas never fought back. He wasn't brave enough. Instead, he kept his head down, praying for the school day to end so he could retreat into the safety of his home. Home was his only sanctuary. It was there that Lucas found peace, especially in the company of his dog, Thor. Rescued from an animal shelter a few years earlier, Thor was not just a pet, he was Lucas's companion, his protector, and his closest friend. The bond they shared was unspoken but powerful. Thor seemed to understand Lucas's pain, and in return, Lucas took comfort in his dog's presence. "Good boy, Thor," Lucas would say as he scratched behind the dog's ears after a particularly hard day. Thor would nuzzle his face, his large brown eyes full of understanding. The dog's love was unconditional, a rare form of solace in Lucas's world. But things were about to change, and Lucas had no idea how much his life would be turned upside down in the coming days. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon when everything changed. Lucas, as usual, took the long way home to avoid crossing paths with Vitor and his group of friends. The taunts and jeers had become unbearable, and he knew they would be waiting for him outside the school gates. The hallways were already a minefield of whispered insults and laughter, so he decided to take the alley behind the school, an old, unused shortcut, hoping it would lead him home without incident. Thor, ever faithful, walked by his side, sensing the tension in Lucas's body language. The dog's presence was a comfort, but today, even the comforting weight of his dog's body didn't seem to ease the knot in Lucas's stomach. He knew that this was just a temporary escape, the torment would follow him wherever he went. As Lucas neared the end of the alley, he heard familiar voices in the distance, loud, confident, and unmistakable. His heart sank. It was Vitor and his crew, and they were heading straight for him. Lucas froze, his pulse racing. There was nowhere to run now. Vitor's voice pierced the silence. "Look who we have here." Little Lucas, hiding in the alley like a coward. Lucas's hands trembled. He didn't know what to do. He looked around, but there was no escape. He pressed his back against the cold brick wall, feeling trapped, as his tormentors approached with smug grins on their faces. Thor, sensing his owner's fear, stood alert, growling low in his throat. "You really think your stupid dog can protect you, Lucas?" Vitor taunted, his voice dripping with amusement. He advanced, as if to prove his point. "You're just a joke, you know that, right?" Lucas's chest tightened. He felt powerless. Every time he tried to stand up for himself, it only seemed to make things worse. He had no fight left in him, no confidence. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, Vitor stepped closer, his face sneering. that was when it happened. A sudden burst of noise echoed down the alley, deep, menacing growls and the sound of rapid footsteps. Thor's bark broke through the tension, so loud and fierce it startled even Lucas. The dog leapt forward, standing between Lucas and the group, his teeth bared, his muscles coiled, ready to protect his owner at all costs. Vider's smirk faltered for a moment as he took a step back. "What the?" he began, but Thor growled again, this time louder, more forceful. The other boys hesitated, unsure of how to react. "Stay back," Lucas managed to whisper, his voice shaking. He had never seen Thor so aggressive, so powerful. The dog's body was rigid, his fur standing on end, a clear warning to the group of bullies. Vider, though the leader of the group, was not immune to fear. He instinctively took a step back, his eyes wide. "You better get your dog under control, Lucas." "I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice no longer confident, but uncertain. But Lucas didn't move. For the first time in a long while, he felt something stir inside him. A flicker of power. Thor wasn't just defending him, he was standing by his side, making him feel less alone. And that realization hit him like a wave. For the first time, Lucas raised his chin, looking Vider in the eye. "Maybe you should leave. Before I tell the principal." The tension was thick, but with the sight of Thor standing strong, growling in a way that made even Vider second-guess his actions, the bullies turned and fled without another word. Lucas stood there, breathless, his heart still racing, but something inside him had changed. Thor nudged his hand gently, as if to say, "You did it." Lucas's throat tightened with emotion. He felt a deep gratitude toward his dog, but more than that, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: courage. Maybe he wasn't as weak as he thought. Maybe he wasn't meant to hide in the shadows forever. As they walked home together, Lucas's mind was spinning. For the first time, he believed in the possibility of something better. Maybe he wasn't just the boy who was bullied. Maybe he could be something more. The next day at school, Lucas felt different. The morning sun seemed to shine a little brighter, and though the hallways still echoed with whispers and laughter, Lucas walked with his head held just a little higher. He had faced his fears, and though the bullies were still around, he knew something now that he hadn't known before: he didn't have to face them alone. Thor's act of bravery in the alley was still fresh in his mind. The dog had shown him that there was strength in companionship, that true courage didn't mean being fearless, it meant having someone by your side who believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself. At lunch, Lucas sat at his usual spot, alone at the back of the cafeteria. But today, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't hiding. He ate his food slowly, savoring each bite, and for the first time in ages, he felt a strange sense of calm. Thor was waiting for him at home, and Lucas knew that there was something worth fighting for now. But the peace was fleeting. Vider, noticing the change in Lucas's demeanor, began to escalate his behavior. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by Lucas, and this new courage seemed to irritate him. The bullying was subtler now: snide remarks during class, shoves in the hallways, and the occasional sneer in Lucas's direction, but it was enough to make Lucas uncomfortable. One day after school, as Lucas was heading home with Thor by his side, Vider and his group cornered him once again. This time, however, the situation was different. Vider smirked, but there was something in his eyes that Lucas couldn't quite place, an intensity that was unsettling. "You think you're tough now, huh?" Vider taunted, stepping closer, his voice low. "I'm going to make sure you regret this." Before Lucas could react, one of Vider's friends pulled out a knife, just a small pocket knife, but enough to send a wave of panic through Lucas's chest. Thor growled fiercely, stepping in front of his owner, but Vider laughed. "Your dog can't protect you forever, Lucas," he said, a dangerous edge to his voice. Lucas's heart pounded. This was no longer just about words. This was real danger. But then something shifted inside him, and he remembered the courage that had come with Thor's presence the day before. He wasn't alone anymore. In that instant, Lucas took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and faced Vidar. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady, but filled with conviction. "I don't need to fight you. I'm not afraid of you anymore." Thor growled louder, sensing Lucas's newfound strength. The bullies hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. They didn't expect this. Vidar, sensing the shift, scowled, but then, to everyone's surprise, he dropped the knife to the ground with a loud clatter. "You're not worth it," Vidar spat. "I'm done with you." The group backed off, and though Lucas didn't understand what had just happened, he realized that something had changed. Vidar no longer saw him as an easy target. Lucas had fought back, without lifting a finger. He had shown his strength in ways they hadn't expected. As the bullies walked away, Lucas felt a strange sense of victory. He hadn't won with violence, he'd won by finding the courage to stand tall, to be who he was, and to stop hiding. The weeks that followed were a blur. With Vidar and his group no longer harassing him, Lucas's life began to settle into a new rhythm. He no longer dreaded the school day, and for the first time, he felt a sense of belonging, not in the classroom, but with Thor. But there was a secret that Lucas hadn't shared with anyone, a secret that had been buried deep inside him for years. It wasn't just the bullying that had been holding him back, it was the pain of losing his father. When Lucas was just a little boy, his father, Enrique, had passed away suddenly in a car accident. Lucas had never really understood what had happened, only that one moment his father was there, and the next, he was gone. His mother never talked about it, and Lucas had never felt brave enough to ask. But now, as he walked home with Thor, something inside him urged him to confront the truth. Maybe it was the courage he had gained over the past few weeks, or maybe it was just the unspoken bond between him and the dog, but Lucas decided it was time to face the past. At home, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her, staring off into the distance. "Mom," Lucas began, his voice shaky. "Can we talk?" She looked up, her eyes softening when she saw the uncertainty in his gaze. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Lucas took a deep breath. "I want to know about Dad. About what happened to him." His mother's face faltered, the mask of strength she wore every day slipping for a moment. She sighed, as if the weight of the past had been too heavy to carry any longer. "It's time you knew," she said softly. "Your father was an amazing man. He loved you so much, Lucas. But the truth is, he wasn't just taken from us by an accident. There was something more. A mistake that he made, something that's haunted me ever since." Lucas listened in stunned silence as his mother explained how his father had been involved in a business deal with some very dangerous people who didn't take kindly to being betrayed. The accident had been no accident at all. It was a warning. Suddenly, everything made sense. The years of silence, the strange looks his mother had given him when he asked questions about his father, all of it clicked into place. But there was something else. His father's mistakes weren't just his own. They had affected everyone in their family, even Lucas, and the weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. But through the pain, Lucas found something else, clarity. He now understood that his father's choices were not his burden to carry. And with that understanding, he knew that he could move forward, free from the guilt that had unknowingly weighed him down. As he sat there with his mother, Thor lying at their feet, Lucas realized that his journey was just beginning. He wasn't just a boy who had been bullied. He was a boy who had faced the truth, who had stood up for himself, and who had found his own strength, even when the world tried to keep him down. He wasn't alone anymore. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange hue over the quiet suburban streets as Lucas made his way home. His hands were tucked deep into his jacket pockets, his mind still spinning from his earlier confrontation with Vitor and his gang. The bullies had backed off, leaving him with a strange mix of emotions, a sense of triumph, relief, and even some lingering doubt. Could he really stand up for himself? Or was this just a fluke? Thor trotted along beside him, his loyal presence like a silent reassurance. The dog's calm demeanor, the way he walked beside Lucas without any urgency, gave him comfort. With each step, Lucas felt a little stronger. Thor had been his constant companion, his shield against the darkness that sometimes threatened to swallow him whole. But today, Lucas had stepped out of the shadows and faced Vitor without hesitation. Yet, deep down, a small part of him was still uncertain. As they turned the corner to their street, Lucas saw his mother's car parked in the driveway. Her blue sedan had been a symbol of stability, even during the hardest days. His mother worked long hours at the hospital, but she always made it a point to be there for him when he needed her. Today, though, Lucas wasn't sure what to expect when he stepped inside. He pushed open the door and was immediately greeted by Thor's excited barking. His mother, sitting at the kitchen table, looked up as soon as she heard the dog's barks. The look in her eyes was different today. There was something behind her gaze, something that Lucas couldn't quite place. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice uncharacteristically tense, "come sit with me for a moment." The way she said it made him feel like something serious was about to be revealed. His chest tightened with an unfamiliar sense of dread. Was it about his father? Was there more that she hadn't told him? He walked over to the table, his heart pounding in his chest. "What's going on, Mom?" he asked, trying to sound calm, even though he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. She motioned for him to sit across from her, then sighed, her hands folding in front of her as if searching for the right words. "Lucas," she began, her voice shaky, "there's something I need to tell you. It's about your father." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. His father's death had been a black hole in his life, a mystery that had never been fully explained. All he knew was that Enrique had died in a car crash when Lucas was only 6. There had been no closure, no understanding. His mother had always kept her distance from the topic, and Lucas had grown used to the silence surrounding it. Now, with his mother looking at him in such a way, Lucas knew something was about to change. "Mom, you've told me all you could," he said, his voice quiet, trying to keep the lump in his throat from choking him. "I know it was an accident, but I don't understand. I just need to know more." His mother looked at him for a long time, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness that Lucas hadn't seen before. Then, without warning, she started to speak, slowly, as if each word pained her. "It wasn't an accident, Lucas," she said softly. "Your father wasn't killed by a drunk driver or by some random twist of fate. He was murdered." The words hit Lucas like a wave. He blinked, not fully understanding what his mother had just said. Murdered? How? Why? He had grown up with the assumption that his father's death had been a tragic accident, a bad moment in time that had stolen away the man he loved. But now his world was shifting beneath him, threatening to pull him under. "Murdered," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "By who?" His mother closed her eyes for a brief moment, as though gathering strength. She took a deep breath before speaking again. "Your father got involved with the wrong people, Lucas. He made some bad decisions. He was working with a man named Paulo Rocha. Paulo was a criminal, someone involved in dangerous activities. Your father, he tried to get out of it, tried to leave that world behind. But Paulo didn't take kindly to people backing out of deals." Lucas's mind spun. The names, the situation, everything felt like it was crashing down all at once. Paulo Rocha. A criminal. His father, a criminal. This was not the man Lucas had imagined when he thought of his dad. He had always seen his father as a hero, a strong figure who had been taken too soon. But now, he was faced with a different reality, one that painted his father in a much darker light. "But why didn't you tell me?" Lucas asked, his voice shaking with a mixture of hurt and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" His mother's face twisted in pain, and she reached out to take his hand. "Because I didn't want you to hate him, Lucas. I didn't want you to think that your father was a bad person. I wanted you to remember him as a good man, the man who loved you, who would have done anything for you. But the truth is, he made mistakes. He thought he could escape that life, but he couldn't." Lucas sat back in his chair, trying to process the information. His head was spinning. The image of his father, the man he had so dearly missed, had been shattered in an instant. He had never imagined this. His mother had always painted his father as the perfect man, and now it felt like his entire childhood had been built on a lie. "But why did you stay silent?" Lucas asked again, his voice a little louder now. "Why didn't you say something earlier? Why didn't you warn me?" "I didn't want you to carry that weight," his mother replied, her voice trembling. "You were so young, and I didn't want you to think your father was anything but a hero. I tried to protect you from that truth because I thought you were too young to understand. But now I see that you're growing up, and you deserve to know the truth, no matter how painful it is." The room fell silent. Lucas didn't know what to say next. He wasn't sure how to process everything. His father wasn't the man he had thought him to be. But, somehow, Lucas realized that this new truth didn't change everything. It didn't erase the love he had for his father. It just added complexity to it, humanity. His father wasn't perfect, but that didn't mean Lucas had to stop loving him. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him for what he did," Lucas said quietly, his voice steady now. "But I don't want to hate him. He was still my father." His mother smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know, Lucas. I know. And you don't have to forgive him. You just need to understand that sometimes people make choices that they can't take back. It doesn't make them monsters. It makes them human." Lucas nodded slowly, his heart heavy with new knowledge but also with a sense of clarity. He wasn't sure if he would ever be able to fully comprehend his father's actions, but he knew one thing for certain: the love he felt for his father was still there. It always would be. "I think I understand now," Lucas said, his voice small but resolute. "But I also know I can't carry this alone." His mother reached over and pulled him into an embrace. "You don't have to, Lucas. You never have to." And as they sat together in the quiet of the living room, Lucas realized that, for the first time, he had found the strength to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. And he wasn't alone. He had his mother, Thor, and the unshakable bond they shared. And that, in the end, was the most important thing. As Lucas entered the 8th grade, a sense of newfound strength settled over him. The school, once a battleground, had become more of a place where he could blend in, no longer the focal point of ridicule. His classmates, who once found joy in making him the target of their jokes, had started to notice the change in him. And though Vitor and his group still roamed the halls, they no longer had the same power over Lucas. The fear that once controlled him had begun to dissipate. One day, after class, Lucas was walking to the bus stop when he noticed Vitor standing alone, leaning against the brick wall outside the school. The boy had never been the type to be alone, always surrounded by his clique. But today, something was different. Vitor's usual arrogance seemed absent, replaced by a quiet, almost defeated posture. Lucas's first instinct was to walk away, to pretend he hadn't seen him. But something made him pause. There was no more fear, only curiosity. He had faced down the bully before, and now, he saw someone who might be in pain, not just a tormentor. He hesitated, then took a deep breath and walked over. "Hey," Lucas said, his voice cautious but steady. Vitor looked up, his eyes briefly widening in surprise. Then, to Lucas's surprise, the older boy sighed and straightened up, wiping a hand over his face in a frustrated gesture. "Why are you even talking to me?" Vitor muttered, shaking his head. "You're the last person I thought would want to waste a second talking to me after everything." Lucas blinked. He had never heard Vitor sound so vulnerable. He thought for a moment, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know," Lucas replied honestly. "I guess I'm just wondering why you always picked on me." Vitor was quiet for a long while, the silence hanging heavy between them. Then he spoke again, his voice softer than Lucas had ever heard it. It's not about you," he admitted, his eyes cast downward. "It was never about you. It's about me. I was the one who was scared. I didn't know how to be myself, how to be anything. So I made you the target. You were easy. You were quiet, you didn't fight back. And that made me feel better. But now, I don't know what to do with myself." Lucas was taken aback. He had never imagined that the boy who had tormented him for so long would reveal such a personal truth. It wasn't what he had expected, but it also wasn't what he had hoped for either. "Why don't you try being different?" Lucas said, the words surprising even him. "Why don't you try not being the guy everyone's scared of? You don't have to keep pretending." Vitor looked at him, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "Maybe," he said, more to himself than to Lucas. "Maybe I can try." As Lucas walked away, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. He hadn't expected to have a heart-to-heart with Vitor, but he was glad it had happened. The old fear that had once paralyzed him now seemed like a distant memory, something he had long since overcome. Lucas wasn't naive enough to believe that Vitor would change overnight, but for the first time, he saw the possibility of redemption in the boy who had made his life so miserable. He knew that there was no quick fix for anyone, but that didn't mean people couldn't change. Maybe, just maybe, they both could. The months passed quickly, and things at school continued to improve for Lucas. He was no longer just the quiet kid who sat in the back of the class. He had found his voice, his confidence. His friendships, though small, felt genuine. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. Then, one late afternoon, Lucas received a phone call from his mother. Her voice was unsteady, and Lucas could tell something was wrong. "Lucas," she began, her tone shaky. "I need you to come home. There's been something I didn't tell you about your father." The words hit Lucas like a cold wave. He had spent months thinking about the past, about the truth that had been hidden from him. He had finally come to terms with his father's mistakes, but now it seemed there was more to the story than he had ever known. He hurried home, door trailing closely behind him. When he arrived, his mother was sitting in the living room, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked up when he entered, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Lucas," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to burden you with this before, but now I think you're ready to know the whole truth." Lucas took a seat beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Your father wasn't just involved in some bad business deal," she continued, her voice heavy with regret. "There's something else. Something much worse. He was working for a man named Paulo Rocha, a criminal. When he tried to back out of the deal, Paulo's men took matters into their own hands. They killed him, Lucas." The revelation was more than Lucas could bear. His father hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered. The shock of it rattled him to his core, but as he looked at his mother, he understood something else. The pain she had carried all these years was something he could never fully grasp, but now, he could help her carry it. "Mom," Lucas whispered, "I don't hate Dad. I never could. I understand now. I really do." And for the first time in a long time, his mother smiled through her tears, a sad but grateful smile. Lucas and his mother spent the next few days talking, trying to make sense of the new reality that had been thrust upon them. It wasn't easy, but they slowly began to rebuild their bond. The more Lucas learned about his father's past, the more he realized how much of it he carried with him, even without knowing. Thor, ever present, provided the comfort that Lucas needed as he processed the painful truths of his family's history. The dog's constant companionship became even more invaluable, a steady presence through the emotional turbulence. With time, Lucas began to see his father's choices not as a source of shame, but as a lesson. He learned that no one was perfect, and that it was how you dealt with your mistakes that truly mattered. His father had made his own decisions, but Lucas didn't have to repeat them. As for Vidar, Lucas hadn't seen much of him since their conversation. But one day, after school, he spotted the older boy sitting alone on the steps outside. Lucas approached cautiously. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked, his voice sincere. Vidar looked up, a faint smile appearing on his face. "Not bad," he said. "Not perfect, but better. You were right about a lot of things, Lucas. I'm trying." And for the first time in their entire relationship, Lucas believed him. The next few days felt like a blur for Lucas. He was no longer the shy, quiet boy who walked the halls of his school with his head down, avoiding the taunts of Vidar and his group of bullies. No, something inside him had shifted after the confrontation in the alley, after Thor's brave intervention. The realization that he could stand up for himself, that he wasn't completely powerless, had ignited something deep within him. But it wasn't easy. Every day was a battle not only against the fear of being humiliated again but also against his own self-doubt. On the way to school, Lucas walked with a new sense of purpose, his shoulders squared and his gaze fixed ahead. Thor was always by his side, and the dog's constant, unwavering presence gave him a quiet strength. It wasn't just that Lucas had become more confident, Thor had made him realize that sometimes, courage didn't come from inside, it came from the relationships we build, from those who stand by us no matter what. But as much as Lucas tried to convince himself that he was no longer afraid of Vidar and the others, the reality of his situation still loomed over him. Vidar had been quiet for the past few days, and though that had allowed Lucas to breathe a little easier, he couldn't shake the feeling that the calm was only temporary. He had no illusions that his bully would just disappear. As Lucas entered the school gates, he spotted Vidar and his gang gathered in their usual spot near the bike racks. Vidar, leaning against the fence, was laughing loudly with his friends, his cruel eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for his next victim. For a moment, Lucas hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest, and he felt the old, familiar wave of panic rising within him. Would today be the day he would face another round of humiliation? Thor, sensing his unease, growled lowly by his side. The dog's protective instinct kicked in, as it always did when Lucas was in distress. The animal nudged his leg with a firm touch, reminding him that he was not alone. Lucas bent down, his fingers brushing through Thor's fur for a moment before standing up straight. He took a deep breath and made a decision. Today, he wasn't going to let Vidar see how much he was still affected. He wasn't going to let the bully win anymore, not even with his presence. Today, Lucas was going to take a step toward freedom. "Thor, let's do this," Lucas murmured softly, his voice steady. He walked towards the building with Thor at his side, every step measured and purposeful. He could feel the weight of Vidar's eyes following him, the pressure of the bully's gaze settling on his back like a physical force. But Lucas didn't flinch. He kept his head high and his mind focused on the future, on the boy he was becoming, not the one he had been. As he passed by the group of bullies, he heard Vider's mocking voice call out to him. Well, look who thinks he's a tough guy now. The quiet little Lucas, trying to play hero. Is the dog going to protect you today? Lucas's pulse quickened, but he didn't stop walking. He didn't turn around. He just kept moving forward, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the school. Thor walked beside him, unwavering, his head held high. The dog didn't growl or bark, he didn't need to. Thor's very presence sent a message loud and clear: Lucas was no longer an easy target. For a moment, there was silence behind him. Lucas's heart raced as he wondered if Vider would come after him again. But then, to his surprise, he heard Vider's voice drop into something softer, more uncertain. "Hey, Lucas," Vider called, but this time there was no mockery in his tone. "You're not gonna hide behind that dog forever, you know." Lucas's feet faltered for just a second, but he didn't turn. Instead, he walked through the school gates, entering the hallway with his head held higher than ever before. The voices of the bullies faded behind him, and for the first time, Lucas felt like he was walking towards something greater than the fear that had once controlled him. It wasn't over, of course. It couldn't be, not yet. But today, Lucas had taken a step towards something more important than just survival. He had taken a step toward his own transformation. The bell rang, signaling the start of classes, and Lucas entered his first class of the day with a quiet sense of resolve. As he walked into the room, his eyes met those of his classmates. For so long, he had felt invisible, like a shadow in the background, but today was different. He didn't feel the same weight of embarrassment that had always made him shrink away. Today, he held his ground, and for the first time, the classroom felt like his space. But even as he sat down at his desk, a lingering fear tugged at him. Vider hadn't given up, and Lucas knew it. He wasn't naive enough to believe that his bully had just moved on. The question now wasn't whether Vider would try again, it was when. Later that afternoon, during lunch, the tension returned. Lucas had settled into a quiet corner of the cafeteria, eating his sandwich when, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Vider and his friends approaching. The gang moved with purpose, their eyes fixed on Lucas. His stomach twisted in knots, and for a moment, he considered running. But then he looked down at Thor, who lay beside him, calm and steady as always. The dog was a reminder that Lucas didn't have to fight this battle alone. Vider stopped in front of Lucas, and for a moment, there was only silence. The lunchroom noise seemed to fade as all eyes turned toward the confrontation unfolding. "You think you can just walk around here acting tough?" Vider's voice was low, almost menacing. "You really believe a dog can make a difference?" Lucas felt his pulse racing again, but this time, he wasn't afraid. He took a deep breath and met Vider's gaze directly. "I don't need to act tough," Lucas said calmly. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Vider's face twitched with surprise. For the first time, there was no reaction from the gang, no laughter, no insults. Just a moment of hesitation. Lucas could see the doubt creeping into Vider's eyes, and he knew it wasn't just because of Thor. It was because Lucas had stopped being the scared, quiet boy who could be pushed around. He had found his voice, and for the first time, it was strong enough to be heard. Vider didn't respond immediately. He stared at Lucas for a long, tense moment before, finally, he turned and walked away. His friends followed suit, leaving Lucas and Thor in the cafeteria, standing tall. Lucas felt his heart slow, and a wave of exhaustion washed over him. He had done it. For now, he had won. He wasn't the same boy who had walked into school that morning. He was someone different, someone stronger. The bullies had not yet disappeared, but Lucas knew that he didn't have to fear them anymore. Not as long as he had Thor, not as long as he kept walking forward, with courage in his heart. And as he left the cafeteria that day, Lucas smiled to himself. Today had been a victory. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but Lucas was ready. He was no longer the boy who cowered in the shadows. Today, he had stepped into the light. On the last day of school, as Lucas walked out into the summer sunlight, Thor by his side, he took a moment to look back at how far he had come. From the scared, isolated boy he had been, to someone who could face his fears with his head held high. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was someone who had learned to stand up for himself, who had faced the truth, and who had found the courage to face life head-on. And it was all because of the unbreakable bond he had with Thor, his faithful protector, who had taught him that sometimes, the strongest heroes are the ones who never back down, even when the world tries to tear them apart. Together, they walked into the future, side by side, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.